Good morning. Most of you know that this homily is the third part of a three-part series on healing of the heart. The first part of the series we talked about hypocrisy, that a hypocrite really has a heart that is unrepented. A hypocrite has an unrepented heart and he has a wounded heart. The second week we talked about how God not only can heal the heart, but that how he wants to heal the heart. And we heard Julianne's testimony about how God had set her free. Now, how many of you were moved by Julianne's testimony last week? That was very powerful. You know, and it takes a lot of courage to come up and to share a lot of that interior stuff, but she wanted to share because she really has been set free by the love of God. And so this week, I want to talk about how Jesus desires and has the power to deliver us from the dominion of darkness. And he does so through this model of unbound prayer. A few months ago, actually back in May, me and some friends from high school went down to Florida for a vacation. And we were actually getting all of our drinks and our food ready so we can actually stock the B&B or B&B, right? B&B that we actually rented. And we were stocking that, and the guy behind the counter says, "So what are you guys doing down here?" You know, I said, we just came down here to do nothing, just to relax. He's like, "Oh man, you guys aren't here to pick up girls?" And then, no joke, and then he started saying all these derogatory things toward women. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, we don't treat women like that. They have too much value for that. They have such a high dignity." And he looks at me, he's like, "What are you, like religious or something?" And I said, "Yes." I wasn't wearing my clerics. I thought to myself, like, wow, I guess religious people are the only ones that hold women in high value nowadays, right? So regardless, we got into this debate about Jesus. He's like, "Well, I'm kind of an atheist. You know, I believe in science and technology, and I'm a historian, and you guys think you believe in Jesus." And he started getting into this argument about Jesus and history, about certain people believing in Jesus, certain people not. And I just started arguing with him, and I shot down several of his arguments right away, and I just simply said, "Stop. You and I can discuss who other people believe Jesus to be all day long. But the real question is not who other people say Jesus is, but who do you say that he is? Because if he is who he says he is, then you have to change your life." And I said, "Look, I don't believe in Jesus because I've followed all the syllogisms of the arguments that are presented to me by the philosophers, by the people in history. While I know that it's important, I believe in Jesus because I've met him. He's alive. He's changed my life. Have you met him?" And as I began to say that, he began to really recognize that what's at stake with his belief or unbelief. He only knew Jesus from a book. He did not know him personally. The reason why I say this is that there are two parts of Christianity that we have to keep in mind. Number one is what Jesus asked the disciples is the most important question he asks to each of us. Who do you say that I am? He's looking for a response of faith. Or faith that maybe is not absolutely certain at the beginning. Who do you say that I am? And people come to know Jesus by watching what he does, right? By seeing, by encountering him. And Peter's response is, "You are the Christ." And in Matthew's gospel, "You are the Son of the living God." He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." That's the first part of Christianity. Who is Jesus? And once you know who he is, you begin to have this relationship. But the second part of Christianity is living out that relationship that he invites all of his disciples to. For he says, "Whoever wishes to follow me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Actually, he says, "Whoever wishes to come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Whoever wishes to come after me. Now, the early Christians, the early generations of Christians, hearing this story or reading this in the scriptures, were saying, where did Jesus go? Where is he inviting people to come after him to? Well, not just to and through death, but to the resurrection. Right, to the life of the blessed in heaven, where there's no more suffering, there's no more pain, there's no more sickness, there's no more tears, that place where we can dwell with the God of love forever. And anyone who apprehends what Jesus is about I believe, will want to be there. We really, really want to be. I don't know anybody, with the exception of those who are in denial of death. And a lot of people who are in denial of death because they're living for this world. But I don't know really anybody who does not want to follow after Jesus. But I know a lot of people who do not want to do what it takes to get there. They do not want to deny themselves, or they do not want to take up their cross. But let me be clear. As a priest, I know it's not a lack of desire. I know that for many Christians, it's not that they don't want to deny themselves, they don't want to take up their cross. It's just that when they have tried, they have found that they're incapable of doing so. And so they live in shame. That for many Christians, this call of the gospel, this call to love, this call to be all about the other is so attractive, and yet when we try to go, we fall on our face. And it's easy for us to see how enslaved we are to certain sins, to see how enslaved we are to certain behaviors, and to see how easy we are to be tossed to and fro by our emotions, our anxieties, our fears. Jesus wants us to be set free. But when we find ourselves enslaved, what we tend to do is we tend to withdraw from Christ out of shame. And when we withdraw from Christ out of shame, we in a certain sense begin to try to rationalize our sin. So maybe this isn't really that bad. Maybe I can actually stay a Christian in this way. And we end up actually saying, well, Jesus actually doesn't quite understand. Jesus, Christianity, maybe the church is wrong on this. And we begin to protect our hearts because our hearts have become compromised. We live with compromised hearts, with one foot in the kingdom and the other foot in the world. And that's why we see the gospel not in terms of love and freedom, but in terms of rules, obligation, and slavery. This is precisely what happens when we live with a compromised heart. Now, why is it that we do this? Well, I would just simply say this, because if we really believe that Jesus has come to set us free, if we really believe that Jesus has come to give us the freedom and the joy of love, to be fully in line with Him, we do this because we have not yet fully experienced that in our life. In other words, we have not yet surrendered to Jesus in particular areas, or we stopped at one point doing so. Because the good news is that Jesus wants us to be free. He wants us to be filled with His joy. But we sometimes say, like, well, surrendering to God is like this big, vague, general thing. Lord, I just surrender to you. But to surrender to Him is to allow Him to free you from bondage to the devil. Because the devil does not want us to be free. He wants us to be in bondage. And so Jesus, as a lover and as a warrior, has come to set us free. And one of the ways that I see as a priest more people being set free than almost any other way is this model of unbound prayer. So what is unbound prayer? Unbound prayer is a prayer model of deliverance by which we experience freedom by Christ by actually going through 5 different keys to unlock the ways that the devil has held us bound. And each of these keys correspond to a constitutive element of the Christian life. And as we walk through these keys, Jesus actually takes authority over the enemy and He sets us free. And we encounter the love of God, which gives us the capacity to share that love of God with others. Many of people who were commenting after Julianne's testimony would say stuff to us like, hey, that was a very moving testimony. That was amazing what God did in her life. But they would say, hey, Father, I never struggled with abuse when I was growing up. I never had this issue. How is this relevant for me? I mean, maybe I know some people that could really benefit from this. This isn't really for me. And my response is, if you understand that unbound is basically taking the rubber of the gospel to hit the road of your life, it helps you understand how is it that you have been bound by the enemy, because how can you surrender if you don't actually know you need to? If we understand that God actually wants to set us free, and this is one of the foundational ways of allowing the gospel to have its way in your life, then you'd understand that anyone who has an area of hopelessness in their life, anyone who has an area of fear or anger or even despair, can really be helped by this mode of prayer. As a priest, I've gone through this many times, and I sometimes will still have to go through it because these keys represent the different responses to the gospel. And I've been through this and experienced tremendous freedom. But I've also been doing this since the first year of my priesthood, and when I was at the seminary, I had an opportunity to teach how to the seminarians how to do this when they become priests. So they too, in the confessional or outside of the confessional, can help people be set free for love. And I've seen hundreds of people go through this, and I just want to say there are two primary ways that I see God bearing fruit in people's lives, completely setting them free. The first is anger. We all know people who are really sensitive, who get offended easily, who get upset very quickly. People who get in a certain state, they fly off the handle. They're unable to control their anger, and they say things and they do things that they never wish they would do. We all know people that you try to approach them to say, hey, you think you messed up here? They're never wrong. They're very defensive. These people are struggling with anger. They're bound by anger. And what happens in the unbound process is that the Lord identifies different areas of their heart that they really have been hurt in. And He invites them to surrender and to forgive specific ways. And as people begin to forgive in ways that they didn't know they needed to, Jesus sets them free from a spirit of unforgiveness, and now all of a sudden the wall comes down on their heart, and they come to experience the freedom and the love that God has for them. As a priest, I have seen people who've held on to woundedness and brokenness out of anger and unforgiveness for decades, completely set free on the spot. Specifically, also with people who have actually had hatred and anger at themselves, are now able to know the incredible love of God, the redemption and the love of the Father, Jesus wanting to come in and heal the wounds. Some people believe they have to live with something the rest of their life. Jesus says, no, not in my kingdom. The second area is fear. The thing that, just think of fears. Some people are just afraid. They're really afraid by the fear of failure. They're driven by a fear of rejection, or driven by a fear of abandonment. And I think something that we see often today, what's related to all this, is a fear of judgment. None of us want to be falsely judged. But one of the reasons why we are kind of given into fear is because there's an area of our heart that does not believe who we are or who God says we are. We believe that we're defined by what we do and how good we do it, or how we look. Because maybe we began to believe that when someone rejected us, when we did not actually experience love in a certain area of our life. Such people who live by fear often have a very hard time opening up to God. I can think of a lot of people who are very successful in the world who live out of self-reliance and aren't opening up to God. They act all tough on the outside. Just scratch a little bit underneath the surface. When they fail, you'll see how much pain actually is there in their heart. But what Jesus does is He comes in, He delivers us from fear through this process, and He begins to speak to us that you are my beloved son. You are my precious daughter. He speaks that, and we come to know the love of God. And as we come to know the love of God, then we're set free. So we don't have to live by fear, we live by faith. You see, fear is to the devil what faith is to God. So why do I say all this? Because I want to invite the parish to consider coming to this conference on October 13th in this church, where the founder of this ministry, Neil Lozano, who travels the world, is going to present to us this model. And this model is something that we're going to go through on the Saturday. We'll have a little bit of time for prayer, but it's meant to kind of orient you to how to surrender more deeply to the love and power of Jesus, who sets us free from the enemy. And then we have this ministry in our parish that actually walks through each of us one by one. If you want, you can schedule an appointment so that each of us can experience this freedom. Because I'm convinced that when we know Jesus' love setting us free from the dominion of darkness, we will know that He is the Son of God, that He is the Son of the living God, that He is our Savior, our Redeemer. But we also will find ourselves having more strength and more courage to deny ourselves, to take up our cross, to follow Jesus not just unto death, but to follow Him to eternal life.